Hey everyone, today we're making turtle shells for ninjas, and we're making them out of regular EVA foam floor mats with puzzle piece edges. I've made a pattern with 4 different sizes of turtle shells that you can print at home, so make sure to check those out at the end of the video. But for now, let's get making.
Okay, so pick the size of ninja turtle shell you want to make and print it off on your printer. Your printer will likely want to scale the pattern down, so make sure it's set to print at actual size or 100%. After printing, the pattern pieces need to be taped together. You can tape them together on a nice bright window, or steal a glass coffee table from behind your drums and stick a light under it. Now you'll be able to see through your papers and have coffee. If you're a bit pedantic, cut off the strip where the printer didn't print on the edge of the sheet, just don't cut off the crosses. Now you can overlap the pieces of paper, line up the crosses, and tape that pattern together. Depending what size you're making, the pattern's gonna look a bit different. For this video, I will be making the size small turtle shell. With everything taped together, you can abandon your table in the middle of the basement and take your pattern to the cutting room. Cut the pattern pieces out along the black lines, and don't pay any attention to those dotted lines. I was trying out some different shapes, and those are potentially gonna be for a different style. Now it's time to grab a foam floor mat. Lay out pieces 8 and 9 on the mat and trace around them. I like to use a fine tipped paint pen for this, so the lines don't bleed through the paint when I paint it later. Make sure to mark the alignment marks and transfer them onto the inside of the pattern piece. Do the same with those lines around the outside edge as well. Mark the top, at the top, and the number of the pattern piece, so you don't get confused. Now, if you take a ballpoint pen and draw firmly over those markings, when you flip the paper over, it's easy to see where they are. Take those pattern pieces and trace the flipped version of them. The nice thing about the size small pattern is all 4 pieces fit on one floor mat. When I'm tracing the flipped version of the pattern, I like to add a B after the number. It just keeps things from being super confusing later. Grab a super sharp knife, which probably means putting in a new blade if you're using a utility knife. This is the single most important thing to getting a good result. Just have a good sharp blade and keep replacing it when it gets dull. Grab a cutting surface to protect your blue table and start cutting directly on those lines you drew. Make sure your cut is nice and vertical, and don't try to cut all the way through in one pass. Here's how clean the edge can look if you are using a nice sharp knife. Arrange your newly cut pieces so everything lines up properly. I often use hot glue for this, but today I'm in a hurry, so I'm using contact cement. I like to apply a layer of contact cement to each edge, spreading it out evenly. Once that layer is dry, I do a second layer the same way. Once the second layer is dry, I can press the pieces together and they will stick. If, however, the glue has dried for a little too long and doesn't want to stick, you can heat it up with a heat gun for a little bit, which reactivates the glue, and then you can stick it together. Once you've glued the 2 9 pieces together and the 2 8 pieces together, you can glue those 2 halves together to make a whole shell base. The shell base is inside out at this point, so let's make it right side out. Pop, pop. If you want, you can heat it up a little bit with a heat gun and shape it, but that's not super necessary. Okay, now grab a second foam mat and lay out all the plates. If your foam mat has a texture on one side, make sure it's facing up for this. It makes it a bit annoying for tracing the pattern pieces, but that's just what you gotta do. Also, don't forget to mark the center lines and the top of each piece. Piece 5, 6, and 7 will also get flipped, so mark them with A for not flipped and B for flipped. Now for cutting these, instead of holding your blade straight up, you want to angle it in toward the center of the piece. This will give our plates some nice chamfered edges, and it's the reason we needed to do it from the back of the foam mat. With the plates cut out, make sure to transfer the center line and other markings from the back to the front. When you're cutting a textured surface at an angle, you'll find that you end up with kinda rumply edges at the bottom. You can fix that by doing a vertical cut that cuts off just that tiny little bit of foam. Okay, this next step is optional. It's annoying, messy, and takes a long time, but I really love the effect it gives to the plates, so I'm gonna do it. Just take a sheet of 150 grit sandpaper on a wood block and sand all the top edges of the plates to round them off. That'll leave you with a nicely rounded but fuzzy edge. You can reduce that fuzziness by heating it up with a heat gun and then smoothing it out a little bit with your hand. Just be careful not to burn your hand, and make sure you have a respirator and good ventilation when you're heating foam. Now while the foam is still nice and hot, form it over your knee to create a nice curved piece. This will make it way easier when you start gluing the plates onto the shell base. Start by gluing piece 2 so its bottom edge lines up with the center line on the shell base. You'll see I'm using hot glue here. It just seemed to be the best way to get these pieces on with the least hassle. Of course, with hot glue, it's important that you hold it down until the glue is completely cool. Otherwise, the edges will probably lift up and it will look ugly. Now, it's a little hard to see, but there's a stack of 2 or 3 foam pieces under the top and the bottom of the shell base. I've got those there to pull the shell into a slightly more vertical shape as I glue down the plates. Gluing that plate layer onto the base basically locks it into whatever shape it is when you glued it together. Next, the side plates 5, 6, and 7 go on. I'd say before you glue them down, test them out together and make sure they're going to fit properly. You may have to cut a little bit off here or there, or space them out a little bit more to make everything fit how you like it. Repeat for the other side and boom, you've got something that's starting to look pretty darn cool. Alright, so the next step is to kind of flare out the section of the shell base that you still see showing. So make one cut right along the bottom edge of the plates, but don't cut all the way through the foam, only maybe halfway through. Then make a second cut a millimeter or 2 below that one that angles up into the first cut. You're basically trying to cut a little V out of the foam that only goes halfway through. Continue this cut all the way around the shell, and probably by the time you get back to the start, you'll be really good at it. Squeeze some hot glue into that cut, maybe in about a foot-long section at a time, then press down on the top of the shell to flare out the rim. How far down you push it is up to your own personal preference. I just pushed mine sort of halfway down, not so it was totally flat on the table. Also realize you're going to have to hold it there until the glue cools, so just have some patience and relax. It's time to add some detail to the rim, so extend the marks that go around the outside edge. There's 2 different ways you could do this. If you're getting tired of making turtle shells and just want to be done, you can cut a V groove along each line and a little notch where the line exits the shell. And that's it, 10 minutes work and you're done. Or if you have an extra couple hours, you can measure the rim and find its narrowest point, make a nice long cut on your foam mat with your knife angling in towards the ruler, mark that distance you previously measured from the line, in my case it's 3 centimeters, and then cut on that line you drew angling in towards the center again. Do the same sanding move that you did on the plates, except this time be more frustrated because it's hard to hold that strip properly. Then cut those strips into sections which correspond with the lines on the shell rim. Cut both ends of the strip at an angle, and cut off the 2 corners of the outside edge also at an angle. Sand the end and the corner angle until it's nice and smooth. Hit it with a heat gun to get rid of the fuzzies and make it easily bendable, then glue it down and hold it there till it's cooled. Now all you have to do is repeat this process 11 more times until the edge is covered with pieces. Oh yeah, the one piece that's a little bit different is the one that's at the very bottom, but if you heat the foam well enough, it's not too hard to bend it into a V that follows the contours of that bottom point. Now that the rim's glued, cut off any excess that's sticking out from the shell base. And lastly, cut notches through the shell base that correspond with the notches in the rim. And you've made probably the best shell you've ever made in your life. Now that's something to be proud of. Okay, before we wrap this all up, I just wanted to show you what the shell looks like without sanding those edges. I also glued long strips around the rim and notched them afterwards instead of using separate pieces. This is great for speeding things up when you're starting to get tired of making turtle shells.
So there we go, we ended up with some really phenomenal turtle shells. I really like this design. I love the ones where I sanded the edges. Looks really great. It's a lot of extra time, maybe like 3 hours extra time, but it really just makes it pop. Obviously, if you're going to go ninjaing, you're going to need some sort of way to hold it onto your back. I'm going to suggest some backpack straps hot glued onto there. Hopefully, if I get time, I'll make another video showing how to attach backpack straps and maybe do some painting or texturing on the back. Maybe let me know in the comments if you want to see more of that kind of stuff, and I can gauge the interest whether I should make another video or whether it's good enough just to be able to make the shell. That's really the hard part. That's the part that took the time. So yeah, I've got 4 different sizes in the pattern. I've got extra small, small, medium, and large. The large one I haven't put the plates on yet because I ran out of time. But that should fit like a majority of people and children. If you need to, you could always scale this extra small down if you wanted an even smaller one. I would just use thinner foam once you scale it down any further than this, maybe 5 mil foam, and you should be good. Just for some context, here's an example of my daughter who's 7. This is with the extra small size and this is with the small size. There you can see how big it is on her. And this is the medium size on me. And then this is the large. Anyways, you can get this pattern on my website. There'll be a link in the description and up here somewhere. And have a great day. Also, something really fun is these work really well as Frisbees. Just don't hit my camera. Thanks for watching. See ya! Okay, all good.